have you guys here. My name is Piyush Ranjan. We'll start the session soon. I think we are still waiting for a few more people to join in. So we'll do that. But in the meanwhile, let me very quickly sort of introduce myself. My name is Piyush Ranjan, as I just mentioned, and I am the founder of Management Masters. We are a boutique admissions consulting firm for the top business schools around the world. And especially with respect to ISB, I think over the last few years, we've kind of developed an expertise. I think over the last 3 years, while we have helped candidates get into some of the top programs like Wharton, Kellogg, Columbia, HEC Paris, INSEAD, LBS, and all these schools worldwide, I think a huge chunk of our success has also come from ISB, where I think over the last 3 years, we helped around 30 people get in. And then this year itself, in the first round, we had like 7 admits, 2 wait lists out of 13 candidates who work with us. And out of those 13 candidates, I think all 12 of them received an interview. So that's basically what we have been doing. We have been working very closely with the candidates who are looking to apply to the top business schools around the world. And as round 2 for ISB has now come to an end, and the interview invites are expected to be rolled out very, very soon. What we wanted to do was essentially have a session on the interview process and how exactly the interviews at ISB look like. And at the same time, I don't want it to be a Gyani session, right? So I don't want to be the one giving out the Gyan. I rather wanted to have sort of somebody who has gone through the entire experience himself and sort of them sharing their experience with you, which I think makes it a much more interesting conversation and sort of much more value-adding conversation for you, since you guys are applying to ISB or probably are waiting for your interview invites, right? So with that said, very quickly, let me introduce Sanchit. So Sanchit essentially worked with us in round 1 for ISB, and he also received an admit from ISB. So what we are going to do is essentially talk with Sanchit about his entire journey and how it was for him to sort of apply to ISB, go through the interview process and learn more about his journey. But before we do that, maybe let me just ask Sanchit if you could give us a very brief introduction about yourself, what you're doing, and how it was sort of applying to ISB. And again, congratulations to you for getting into ISB.
Thanks a lot, Piyush, for having me here, and thanks everyone for joining in. To briefly introduce myself, as Piyush mentioned, I am Sanchit. I am based out of Delhi, and I've been working with Ernst & Young for the last 4.5 years within their enterprise risk practice. So primarily working with the technology clients in order to understand the risks in their business and optimize and make their business processes more efficient. So that's what I've been doing, a lot of deep diving into risks and compliances. Outside of work, I'm a dancer. I like to follow cricket a lot. So that's the fun part. And yeah, I'm looking forward to interacting with you all, and hopefully I can give some value add to your ISB application / interview journey. And yeah, looking forward to interacting in the next 1 hour.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sanchit. Again, I know this is quite heavy for you as well. So Sanchit just came back from his office, and it's only hardly been 10 minutes that he has been home. So thanks again, Sanchit, for joining at such short notice. Now, before we sort of move forward, right? So could you tell us a bit about how was your overall ISB application journey, right? So how did you apply? What do you think worked out the best for you in your case, both through the application and through the interview process? Could you take us through that very shortly?
Mm-hmm. So for me, the journey of applying at ISB started quite early. I was fortunate in terms of wrapping up my GMAT exam by April of this year. And I think for me, that sort of helped me focus on my research and the applications solely. So for me, I think that was a very crucial part of the entire application journey. But coming to more specifics about ISB, I think firstly, ISB suits very well with where I want to head. So it was a no-brainer for me to apply to ISB. And of course, it's one of the best, if not the best colleges in India for an MBA aspirant, right? Talking about my entire application journey, I started working with, Piyush and Management Masters early May or sometime in June. And we were directly, we were on board with what's the expectation of ISB, because ISB was one of the first colleges that I applied at. And I think throughout whatever sessions I had with Piyush and Management Masters, I think there was a lot of clarity that I got in terms of how I want to approach the application. It's a huge application. So breaking it down into components, whether it's the goals, whether it's the essays, whether it's achievements, career experiences, etc. I think breaking that down very precisely really helped me structure my application. And I think because of that timely start that I got, I was able to wrap up my application, I think a month and a half before the deadline, which meant that I could devote time to my essays, which meant that I could devote time to my application in general, the entire checklist that we need to fill in, getting done my recommendations. And ISB recommendation, the LOR, I think is one of the trickier ones. So your referee will require, inputs from your end as well. So that will take some time. And then I think once that was all sorted and streamlined in a particular way, I think that really helped me submit a very good application. And talking about interviews, I think getting a head start on the interviews is really helpful. I feel that I feel that some of you will be in a position where you'll be waiting for your admissions result regarding whether you'll get through the interview or not. But I feel that you can utilize this time to start prepping for that, and that is something that really worked in my favor as well. Because you might not know what the schedule will be like. I am based out of Delhi, so I was the second round of cities that ISB was visiting in. And there were people who were in the first round as well, in the first week of admission. So they essentially just got 4 or 5 days to prep, right? So that time, with the anxiety, with the, all the preparation, the time really flows out and runs pretty fast than we can imagine. So
Sanjit, sorry to cut you short, but with respect to the interview process, right? So you mentioned that you were able to finish off your application almost a month and a half in advance, right? So when did you actually begin the interview prep? Did you start that after you got your interview invite, or did you already start the interview prep beforehand?
I started my interview prep beforehand, approximately, I think 15 to 20 days before the due date when ISB was expected to announce the results. And essentially what I did was that I found a buddy who was also applying with Piyush, and just tagged with him, took each other's mock interviews, broke our sessions down into two to three aspects, and essentially spent like an hour or so taking each other's mocks and utilizing that time to really get good clarity on what our application looks like and what sort of questions we can expect. So rolling back to the question, I started around 15 to 20 days before ISB was supposed to announce interview results.
All right, makes sense. And when you say that you started working on the interviews, were there any particular areas that you were really focusing on while you were preparing for your interviews?
Yes. So actually, what I did was that when I tagged up with one of my co-applicants, we sort of broke down our mock interview process into three aspects. One was on the professional goals. So we spent a good 1 hour taking mocks of each other on our professional goals only. 1 hour was on our professional experience, where we were coming from. Professional experience also includes my academics, everything that I've done through school, college, till my professional experience of 4.5 years. And the third session was on extracurriculars, hobbies, etc. So sort of gave 1.5 hours to each of these aspects. And that sort of really summed up very beautifully on, what are the sort of things that I need to work on, and what are the sort of the things that I already have, a confident approach in. And then once I got the interview invite, then of course I enrolled with management masters, and then is when I worked with the alums in terms of mock interviews. But the head start that I got really helped me in sort of, focusing on the mocks very specifically and categorically on things that I want to focus on.
Right. That sounds very, very interesting, right? Because you were working with a co-applicant, that you started sort of breaking down your profile into different areas, and then you were questioning each other on those. Could you tell us a bit about like what would those questions look like, right? So if you were doing a mock with your fellow applicant, what would you ask each other, and what kind of questions would you prepare for?
So we started with the basics, which one would expect in any MBA interviews, which includes the career goals, short-term goal, long-term goal, why we want to go in a specific direction post MBA, and questions like, checking each other's sort of belief in the goal. And that is something I was also like that I also faced in my actual real interview, right? So why I want to do a particular thing in my life. Why, for example, if I want to do consulting, right? Why do I want to do consulting? What is so special about consulting that excites me about it? And these are the sort of questions that also were thrown at me during my interviews. Maybe not in the same capacity, or maybe not using the same verbiage, but in a sense, they were checking my firmness on my goals. So goals is very important. Moving on, I think whatever pointers you're writing in your application with respect to your work experience, you need to be thorough with it, right? They can deep dive into one point, or they can just talk on a very generic sense about all your experiences. So again, taking up those experiences and sort of taking a step back and seeing what you did, what was the impact that you brought, what were the efforts that you put, so on and so forth. So questions on the work experience, questions on career goals, and then lastly, touching base on extracurriculars. I was also asked questions on extracurriculars. So why did I do a particular thing? Or why did I, for example, if I've done theater during my undergrad, so, right? What were the challenges that I faced? What was one key learning for me? What if, so I come from a risk background. So one of the first questions that I was asked in the interview was, describe a risk that you've taken in your life. So this was something that I did not prepare for, but I mean, it can be as vague as this and as specific as your goals. So yeah.
Right. Sounds very interesting. So, let's dive a bit deeper into the actual interview that happened, right? So could you give us a very quick rundown of what exactly happened in your interview, right? Could you give us a brief background of that, and sort of what kind of questions were asked, were thrown at you, and how did your prep? We'll come to that part later. So could you tell us a bit about your interview experience itself? What kind of questions came?
Mm-hmm. So to just give a brief, like to describe my interview in one or two words, I think it was an entirely conversational setup for me. My interview lasted for about 30-35 minutes, entirely conversational in nature. Started with a brief introduction about myself. My interviewers introduced themselves. Then, of course, the question that I just told everyone earlier, describe a risk. That was just sort of an icebreaker, I think. And once I answered that, they went into the kind of projects I've done. They picked up a project or two, and then they started talking to me on those projects. I'd mentioned specifically about one project in my essays as well, and they sort of went back to the essay and the pointer that I mentioned in the essay, and how I tackled the situation. So it was situational in that sense. Then they spoke to me about my goals and why I want to pursue whatever my goals are. And then sort of they were also, judging how firm and how clear I am about my goals. So sort of throwing curveballs. Again, it wasn't a pressure interview. It wasn't a grilling interview, but they sort of were checking how firm and how clear I was, about my goals. So for example, they told me that what if you do not get the job that you're looking for through the ISB placements or through the alum network? What will your next step or plan B would be, right? And fortunately, like while working with Piyush, we also worked on plan B. So I utilized that aspect, and then eventually rolling back to my long-term goal, so that there's a clarity that I can portray through my answers. So yeah, and then lastly, they touched base a bit on extracurriculars, and they ended with opening the floor for questions. So I asked them a couple of questions, which always is good, as long as you're not asking silly questions. I mean, questions which are very obvious. So I asked them a couple of questions, and that's how the interview went.
Right, sounds pretty interesting, and there are certain things that I want to pick out from this, right? So if I get this correctly from your interview experience, right? So they did not grill you, but they did come up with a lot of follow-up questions on whatever answers you were giving, right? And they touched base on almost everything that you had, every area of your overall application, be it your essays, be it your the work experience that you've shared, or the extracurricular activities, right? So everything was touched upon, and wherever they had certain doubts, they would sort of go deep into it, or sort of try to test, if what you're saying you are clear about it or not. How much clarity do you hold, right? That sounds very interesting. One thing that I want to very quickly sort of bring up is, as you said, that the floor was open to you to ask a question, right? And yes, it is quite. I think we always provide that advice that don't ask silly questions or very generic questions. But could you tell us a bit about how did you prepare for what kind of questions you wanted to ask them?
Yeah, I think this aspect was this is actually pretty tricky, because you don't know what the other person might perceive as silly, right? Something which is silly to me might not be silly to anybody else in this forum, right? So what I did was that in the first set of mocks that I had with my co-applicant, we sort of openly discussed this aspect, and we talked to each other about it in terms of what questions could be asked. And then I sort of took a confirmation, or I sort of took the alums advice. So the alums were pretty clear about it, that you can ask whatever questions. There's no judgment, there's no harm in asking any type of question. So but just to give a starting point to everyone here, you can ask things like their professional trajectory post ISB, or how ISB has helped them after the MBA, right? It's not only, of course, within the MBA, there are like 1,000 resources, but like after MBA, what has their journey been, and what's ISB's role in it been? Things like, maybe one of the activities, events, a subject, a course, a professor that, that could be really relevant to the goals that you're after, because of course the panel will consist of individuals who are in a similar career trajectory and who've come from a similar background. So I think ISB sort of creates the panels in that fashion. So I think things like those, and of course, you can also ask them about themselves, right? For example, I asked them where they're working, what they're doing, and this was one of my questions. And I think it's very good to know your interviewers, and it sort of also helps show interest of the applicant in the panel.
Right, that makes sense. And very quickly, to sort of understand, how did sort of working with us actually help you prepare for the interview? Could you shed some light on that, on the process that we had, or the way you worked with us to prepare for the mocks? Could you sort of just give a brief of how did that help you?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when for me, working with Piyush was a no-brainer, because I'd worked with him through the application. So the best part that I really liked about the 3 mocks, I took the 3 mock package, was that all the 3 alums gave in some sort of different feedback, and they were coming from a different point of view. So it's not like the mocks are repetitive in nature, even with the questions that they ask. So essentially, it was like a fresh mock for me every time, right? sometimes they also give you, I think for me, it was also an eye opener in terms of the things that I need to stick with during my actual interview. I remember in one of my mocks, I was asked a lot of questions on the impact that I'd created through my work, and the trajectory that I want to take after my MBA. And that mock sort of really brought very good clarity in terms of what I want to say in the interview and what I do not want to say in the interview. Right? Everything that I did not want to say in the interview, I said it in that mock, and that sort of played
That's
in my
always
favor.
good. The
Yeah.
mock बोल के खत्म कर दो.
Exactly. So I think all the three alums bring in a different point of view. They bring in a different set of questions that challenge you on different contexts, whether it's work X, whether it's goals, whether it's anything else, right? So I think it's a lot of variety that you get, which really stood out for me.
All right, sounds pretty good. Just to give a brief of this, what Sanchit is talking about is essentially we have a mock interview preparation service, obviously, and where we have a panel of 3 ISB alumni who have a lot of experience in sort of preparing and helping prepare candidates for ISB interviews, right? I think between the 3 of them, they have helped more than 100 candidates. They have experience of more than 100 mocks, right? So, and some of these alums, they have also served on the application, on the actual interview panel for ISB previously. So they bring in a lot of experience, and these 3 alums, all of them, they come from completely different backgrounds. So one is a consultant, one is a product manager, one is a, he's the head of analytics at a, coming up startup. And they bring in very diverse perspectives. And it's very similar to how your actual interviews would be as well, right? Because you don't know the background of the alum who's going to take your interview. And at the same time, even if they come from a similar background, the person behind that background is always going to be different. So as Sanchit mentioned, all 3 of them, they brought out different aspects of his application in their interviews, right? Even though they were coming from the same school, they've had a similar experience. The way they would look at your profile would be very different and very personal in nature, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that, Sanjit. Now, a very quick question before we sort of open this to our viewers. What, in your perspective, what would be the best things to do at this point of time for people who have applied in round 2 for ISB and who are waiting for their interview invitations? What would you suggest?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think we've also spoken a lot about it previously. Like I would recommend that you start early. I know a lot of times we get lazy. In fact, I was in the same boat. There's a lot of procrastination. But I guess that because I was able to utilize the 15-20 days before ISB actually announced the interview schedule and everything else, I was already a step ahead in terms of my interview preparation. You can find any co-applicant, anybody who's applying with you. Just exchange your applications, take your mocks. You can break it down the way that was described, or just feel free to utilize your own minds towards taking those mocks. But actually do it. But it's not necessary that it's a co-applicant. You can ask your friends who are not applying. You can ask your family members. Just do that. Have very good clarity on whatever you've written in the application, right? The alum or the interview or the panelists knows you only through the PDF that you've submitted, right? They don't know you beyond that. So have very good clarity, like assuming some of you have already filled in the applications, you would know that you have to briefly write about each of your work experience and then the value generated and stuff like that. So be thorough with each point because you can be questioned on each point. Reread your essays, because a lot of times we tend to apply to multiple schools and then we might not exactly remember what we wrote in the ISB essay. So reread those essays. Again, go back to why you've written it, what sort of goals you're targeting and stuff like that. Lastly, I think I think cut the noise at towards the interview time. There will be a lot of forums online wherein people will post a lot of things. when I was also prepping for my interview, there were a lot of feedbacks from the previous weeks, interview experiences, and people were grilled, people were, put under a lot of pressure. But my experience was entirely opposite, right? Of course, being grilled and being put under pressure is subjective, but as long as it's not impacting your preparation, go ahead, read all the forums as you want. But if it impacts you in any way, then I would suggest you just shut the noise and cut the crap and just focus on the application that you've submitted. And if, of course, if you've been invited for the interview, ISB finds merit in you, right? So be confident on your application.
Absolutely. Sounds very, very nice, Sanjit. And I think that aspect of, the noise existing on online forums, it's so apt, because even among our own applicants, we had a lot of people coming through, I've heard this on GMAT Club, I've heard somebody say this, I've heard somebody say this. But what you have to realize as candidates is when you go into your interview and you are having your interview, it's a very personal experience that you've had, right? And that will differ from everybody else's experience. And what you consider as stress may not be stress for somebody else, may be extremely high stress for somebody else, right? So it's always going to be very subjective in nature. Don't sort of give in to that. Rather focus on what you know. Focus on making sure that your story is very, very clear, and you are very you have good clarity about your own story, and you're able to present it in a very, very easy way, so that the person in front of you who does not know you is able to understand where you're coming from, your motivations and everything. So thank you so much for that, Sanjay. I would like to open this for questions so that we can have a bit more interaction here. We have almost 32 people. So if you have any questions, feel free to sort of raise your hands and mute and ask your question. So yes, Oshank, please feel free.
All right. Thank you, Piyush and Sanjit, for this insightful session. I am very curious to know what was the plan B answer that you gave. I mean, if it's okay, maybe you can share it with the larger forum.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the admit now, so I think it's.
I think for the plan B, we'll also have to share the plan A first, right?
I think he briefly mentioned, no, that plan A was consulting and.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't remember anymore. What was your plan A?
Yeah, rightly picked by Oshank. Plan A is consulting. Right. So yeah, so they posed questions on, consulting is a very fancied post MBA career goal at ISB, and there's a lot of competition, so on and so forth. And they asked me why, what if you do not land up any consulting job, what will you do? I said, I'll use my ISB alum network. Said, no, that's exhausted. What will you do? So then I said that, then my plan B would be to take up CEO strategy office or CEO's office roles in strategy or internal corporate strategy role. In that sense, I will still be working with different functions of a particular industry, which I can always utilize as a valid experience and move back to consulting once the jobs open up, economy opens up, stuff like that. So that is how I tackled the question. Still, because my long-term goal is to remain in consulting, like as per the application. So I wanted to be very clear with that. I did not want to tinker with, नई मिल रही consulting jobs, तो मैं कर लूंगा strategy, क्या फर्क पड़ता है? So I just wanted to be very clear on consulting it is for me, and I will roll back to consulting if I do not get jobs through the ISB placements or alum network, maybe in a year or two's time, whenever jobs open up.
All right. Sounds really nice. Hiba has a question. Hi, Hiba.
Yeah. Hi, Piyush. Hi, Sanchit. So my question is that what I've heard is that if you mention consulting as one of your post MBA goals, then during the interview you're asked a lot of case questions and like case studies and guess estimates. Is that true?
I wish I can answer that in black and white. But I was also, so this is a very true story. I was not preparing for any guesstimates or case competitions till 3 days or 4 days before my actual interview date. And then that is when I read an online forum and I panicked and I started preparing, of course, without any positive returns, because the panic was set in so much that I could not concentrate on what's important for me. And eventually that I did not prepare for cases or guesstimates. I read a few, to be very honest. I read a few cases, I read a few guesstimates just to get a framework in my mind, but did not prepare a lot for it. Was not asked for it in my interview, but I know a few fellow applicants who were asked guesstimates. Case I have not heard, but it also depends, on what experience you're bringing on board. If you're already into consulting and you want to, again, do consulting post MBA, chances are that they might not ask you because they would know that you've already done that through your work. But if you're in sales or maybe say marketing, stuff like that, anything, any other basically domain, then they might ask you. But chances are limited from what I know of like different interview experiences. But long story short, you can have certain frameworks set so that you can tackle the question, but you don't need to panic, and like case or guesstimate will be just one question. It won't be all of your interview.
Just to add on top of this, right? Case studies or guesstimates, they are not. What you have to understand is the concept behind the interview, right? What or the intention behind asking those questions. If let's say if you come from a background which is not related to consulting at all, and you've mentioned that you want to get into consulting, right? So that's your goal. Very often, what the alums would want to try and see is if you are actually mentioning the goal just because you are mentioning MBA and just because it sounds like a very, very lucrative career, or have you actually put in some thought? Do you have some base level of skill sets which align with what consulting requires, right? And even if you are asked a guesstimate or a case study question, they're not looking for the right answer. What they're looking for is essentially the thought process. Do you have some basic thought process in place which will allow you to solve those questions, right? They are not expecting perfect answers or how you would exactly solve a case study, during your ISB interview, because if you were able to do that, you would not be applying to ISB, you would be applying to the consulting firms, right? So what you have to keep in mind always is, the motivation behind asking such questions. Again, to highlight, guesstimates or case studies are not the most commonly asked questions. They might come up for somebody who has mentioned, only if it aligns with your profile, it's relevant to your story, only then will such questions come. But even then, it also depends very heavily on the interviewer, right? So for example, Sanchit had mentioned consulting as a potential goal. He was not asked any guesstimate questions or any case study questions, but we had other candidates who also had mentioned consulting as a goal, and one or two of them were asked guesstimate questions, right? But what you have to keep in mind again is that is one candidate out of the thousands of candidates who would have been interviewed by ISB, right? Just because guesstimates and case studies are so popular in general, right? And they are, they require certain skill sets and frameworks to solve, they get very amplified in terms of the interview prep times, right? So it's just one person or maybe 5 people getting asked that question during the entire round 1 questionnaire, right? But they will get amplified multiple times, and you will feel like everybody is being asked guesstimates and case studies during the interviews, right? Which does not really happen, right? So personally, what we suggest is don't worry about guesstimates or case studies. Even if you do get something, the idea is more about the way you approach it, the thought process behind it. And even if you make a mistake, even if you feel like, I have absolutely no clue what I'm going to say, you can mention it. You can, during the interview, you can highlight, I have never solved any case studies before. So it could be the case that, whatever I'm answering is probably absolute shit, right? So you can safeguard yourself in that way and then try giving out your answer. Because the moment you have safeguarded yourself, you have created an opening for yourself to actually shit in the answer and not be worried about the consequences, right? Because they also know the people who are interviewing you, they know that you don't have those skills. That's why you're applying to ISB, so that you can get those skills, right? So I hope that clarifies. Samyak has a question. Hi, Samyak.
Hey, hi Piyush, hi Ranjit. Thank you so much for arranging these sessions. So my question is, so interviews, are the field based? For example, I come from pharma background, so the interview panel will have someone from pharma, or how does it work?
Let me take that question maybe. So ISB does try as much as possible to have somebody aligned with your profile, right? But it's not a necessary thing. It's not guaranteed always, right? If let's say nobody from pharma background agrees for becoming an interview panelist, then you will not have a pharma background alumni taking your interview, right? But ISB definitely tries a lot to match the background of the interviewers with the candidate themselves, right? So that is something that they try to do, but it's not something which is guaranteed always, right? Sanchit, in your case, did your interviewers have risk background?
Yeah. So I think both of them sort of were aligned or worked in the risk industry for some time.
Okay.
One was working in the fraud investigation,
Mm-hmm.
teams and doing all of those fraud investigation cases, and the other one was coming from another big four. So even though presently they are not working in risk,
Right.
which was also again aligned to my career trajectory, right?
So that makes a lot of sense. Again, what you also have to keep in mind, Samyak, is how would you say, the popularity of the role that you are in, the niche of the role that you are in, right? That also matters a lot. If you come from a very niche role, it's quite unlikely that ISB will find exactly somebody from your profile. But if you come from a more common role, right, it will be much easier
Right.
to find that alumni, right?
Great. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Arvind has a question. Hi, Arvind.
Hi Piyush, hi Sanchit. By the way, even I come from a PFSI industry and I work in the risk area itself. So,
Sanchit can be your interviewer. Right.
so since Sanchit works at a consulting firm in the risk department, so how difference does it make for me to go into consulting compared to Sanchit, because he's already in a big four company?
I'm not really sure I understood the question, Arvind. Could you clarify a bit?
So my question is, like, even my future goal is going into consulting, but since I come from a banking background, so how would the interviewers look at my profile compared to the profile of Sanchit?
I don't think we have enough information about your profile or your story, right, to be able to actually comment on that. Because even if you look at, okay, Sanchit comes from a risk consulting background and now he wants to go into consulting. Just because both of those things are consulting in them does not make the story straightforward, right? He had a very clear reasoning of why he wanted to get into consulting and how he sort of got aligned with that. So I think we'll have to sort of take a more detailed look into this, right? If it actually makes sense or not. What I can say is, if the story that you have of why you want to get into consulting, if that story makes sense, that is logical, rational, and it sort of has a very clear basis for why do you want to make that switch, right? Then these schools or alums don't have any issues sort of being convinced that you actually want to get into consulting. What matters is essentially that you are able to very clearly specify the reason why you want to go there, and or not just consulting, but for any role, right? Whatever goals you have, why do you have those goals? How did you form those goals, and how your previous experiences have inspired you towards those goals, right? That's something which is very, very important to keep in mind. If you're able to keep all those things in check, these schools would not have an issue with you going into consulting.
Okay. Thank you, Piyush.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
So,
Hi.
yeah, hi. I mean, it's sort of a follow-up question to what Arvind asked. So, I have a similar profile like Sanchit. I mean, I work for a big four firm, and I'm also in the risk technology thing. And one of my like major this thing issues while applying was that how do I explain that, I mean, like again, how Sanchit mentioned that they try to throw curveballs during the interview and they try to assess that, why is it that what you want to do post your MBA. So, that shift from risk consulting to say management consulting. So, how do you tackle these questions where, you make them, believe that this is what you really want to do and not just because I have attended a few info sessions of, where, ISB alums were there and I've gotten a sense that a few of them really have mentioned that a lot of people want to go into consulting because it sounds fancy and there's this entire hype among the Indian B schools. So yeah, that is what I wanted to ask.
Sanjit, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can give it a
Maybe
go.
could you share what you talked about? I think that maybe gives a better idea of how to tackle that.
Yeah, sure. So, how I tackled it, or how I like thought about why I want to pivot to management consulting was because it opens up a lot of learning opportunities. Firstly, I think it does not restrict you to just risk or maybe just one domain or one function. That is primarily why I want to switch to strategy consulting. And having spoken to a few of my friends who are working as strategy consultants, I really like and I'm intrigued by the work they do. Right? I know I come from a consulting background. It's not entirely consulting. It's more of advisory than consulting. Right? So I know like what consulting entails. I have a fair share of experience, and I exactly know what sort of work strategy consultants do because of my experience of speaking to different people who are working as strategy consultants. So for me, the reasoning was very clear that I want to sort of be open to different learning opportunities, and I don't want to just focus on understanding business or sort of creating an impact from a risk standpoint, and just to open up that sort of opportunities where is why I want to pivot to strategy consulting. And it is in line with my um, interests also. And I sort of backed it up with how I have indulged in different experiences throughout my journey. Now that was just working well with the kind of goal that I was going ahead with. It's not necessary that you also do the same, but maybe getting involved in extracurriculars or taking up certain additional um, technical classes or technical modules outside of my work. So all of these sort of pinpoint towards my interest in indulging into different learning opportunities, which sort of also, when I think about it holistically, binds really well with why I want to go to strategy consulting. And that is very specific to me. You might not be able to relate to it, but giving a very generic touch to it, I feel that as long as you are convinced of why you want to do strategy consulting, I think you should be able to convince the interviewers as well. And the interviewers will never let you know if they're convinced or not. They will either take it and they will not let you know if they are not convinced. That you will get to know later once you receive the results. But I think it's important to understand that you should be clear and you should have a very clear reasoning and clear sort of uh, understanding of why you want to do strategy consulting. Convincing them is not a big challenge, I feel.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Makes sense. Let's take a question from Ujjwala and then we go back to Samyak and Arvind, right?
Hi Piyush, hi Sanchit.
Hi Ujjwala.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that apart from development and management consulting, what additional we can expect to have a career in post MBA from ISB?
Um, I think I'll skip that question at this time, Ujjwala, because I would really suggest you to maybe just go through the career report at ISB, right? I think it's a beautiful report with a lot of detail on what exactly is possible through ISB, the kind of companies that come, the kind of profiles that they offer, the kind of roles that they offer. So I think that would really help you understand about the different kind of possibilities that exist post ISB, right? In this session, we want to keep it more focused on the interview prep for ISB, right? Especially for people who have applied and who are waiting for their interview invites for round 2. So I think at this point, I would really suggest you to maybe go through the career report at ISB, attend some sessions with them, right? So ISB has a ton of sessions that they organize with respect to their career opportunities, the different areas in which it is possible to make careers through ISB. So I would really suggest you to sort of maybe look at that, and that would help you tremendously. Right.
Definitely.
So Samyak, you had a question, right?
Yeah, thanks. I have a question. So I feel that I get into ISB, it's like one of the best B schools in India. Cream of the cream goes there. And what I feel is I'm in the self-doubt that I don't have the required mindset. I feel like, there are the best people who are there, and am I really suitable? Can I do it? And that self-doubt, when start talking, it's difficult. But then how can you prepare for it? Or maybe how your venture is also helping for that.
Okay. I would let Sanchit answer this. Sanjit, do you feel prepared to go to one of India's best business institutions?
Honestly, Samyak, I feel that a lot of us who've already gotten the interview or who've already gotten the admit are still sort of have these questions, and these questions are not just for ISB. I feel these questions will keep coming in throughout any venture of life you delve in. I think I also have had bouts of self-doubt, but I think eventually it's about, just focusing on the process when you're applying and focusing on the application, then focusing on the interviews, and then things will fall in your favor. I feel it's a little philosophical to say, but I mean, what you're saying, I mean, I think even I have felt it at EY, I felt it once I got an admit. Piyush must have felt it when he was starting up. You would have felt it in any other stage of your life. So I feel it's more important to just focus on your actions and focus on the process, and try to keep these thoughts on the sidelines as much as possible. I mean, uh, it's a little.
Yeah,
What do I
just
say?
to help you out, right? I think it's a very important question that you asked, Samyak, but which does not really have a lot of answer, right? Because what you are describing right now is essentially exactly the definition of what is very popularly known as imposter syndrome, right? How do you feel that you are at the place you deserve to be at the place?
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
And that is something that everybody faces. So what you have to keep in mind, what I usually suggest our candidates to look at if you're having such kind of thoughts or feelings, is essentially instead of trusting your own self, trust that the person who has given you that admit, they have made the right choice. So even though you might not feel that you're worthy of XYZ institution or being at a certain place, trust that that particular school has made the right choice, right? And just focus on what you are supposed to do. The rest of the things are not in your control, right? So
Right.
I think that's
because I think mindset will speak in that interview, and then sometimes the questions, the way you prepare, the way you answer, the interviewer get only maybe an hour or 40 minutes or 45 minutes to judge you, evaluate you. So, how do you really fine tune yourself when you're, presenting your thoughts?
There's no alternative to practicing as much as possible, right? I think as Sanchit mentioned, so he took up a mock package with us of 3 interviews. So he did 3 mocks with us. But then even apart from that, even before he came into that those mocks, he had already done like 3 mocks with other people, on his own, right? And even after that, even after the 6th mock, he was still improving. He was still sort of finding something that he could improve upon. And then he had his ISB interview. I'm pretty sure if he looks upon his ISB interview, he'll still feel like, okay, this is something I could have improved upon. So when he goes for the next interview, maybe at ISB for a job interview, he'll again find something that he will improve upon. So there's no shortcut to that. There's no magic solution that I can tell you कि हाँ भाई ये गोल ही बेचता हूँ मैं ले लो सही होगा. There's not.
Yeah, got it.
Let's move to, I think we have 3 people very quickly. So Arvind, very shortly, let's take your question. Then we move to Osha.
I have a generic doubt in terms of application. So how does my UG CG affect the application compared to I have a good GMAT score above 750?
All right, so I'm going to answer that very quickly. Nobody knows that, right? The only people who actually know that would essentially be the ISB admissions team, and they are never going to disclose it to you, right? Because that is the trade secret that they have. But what I can tell you is that if you have low grades in your undergrad, you are compensating that with, the only way to compensate for that is through a very good GMAT score. And if you have a 750 plus GMAT score, you have already compensated everything that you could have done. So as far as your academics is concerned, if you have a 750 GMAT and then you have a low GPA, what you can be clear about is that you have done everything that you could have done to improve on that. There's nothing more that you can actually do anymore on the academic front. अब ISB जो decision लेगा वो ISB लेगा. Nobody knows how they will do it. Right?
Thank you.
Cool. Kshitij, let's take your question and then we move to Osha.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Piyush. Thanks, Sanchit. So just a quick question. Sanchit, as you mentioned that you started interview prep way before, 15 days before the results came out. So what gave you the confidence, or that how did you know ki you would get a shortlist? Something like Samyak mentioned, right? The imposter syndrome would also play in, like, if I start now, but if I'm not shortlisted, that would be like a bit disheartening. So,
okay, so just to clarify, when Sanchit says that he started preparing on his own, right? He did not make any financial investment in us, right? Just to clarify that, to keep that part safe. And that is something that we also suggest to our candidates usually. It's not necessary to start working with professionals or start making financial investments before you get the interview in mind, but definitely start preparing on your own. Now I will let Sanchit sort of answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've covered the first part of it. I did not make any financial investment when I was preparing 15-20 days prior to the results announcement. And I think what gave me confidence was that somebody in the applicant pool was proactive enough to take the initiative, and I was just I just jumped in and just took the leap. We both of us were not sure if we'll land up an invite. In fact, the applicant that I was working with was a reapplicant. So I mean, it's just a leap. And in fact, I mean, if not ISB, maybe some other school you're applying at. If not ISB this year, ISB in the following year. If not ISB in any of the year, maybe a job interview. So I mean, it's just practice, right? You can invest 1 hour from one, like in a week, and then it might just end up helping you once you get a short list. So I wasn't confident, neither was I. Like, I wasn't confident on either if I'll get it or if I will not get it. I just jumped in that opportunity and just took it.
God, thank you so much, Sanchit. Thanks, Piyush.
Thank you so much for that. Oshank, yeah, I think we'll close with this question.
Yeah.
Nobody else has any other questions, but yeah, Oshank.
Sanchit, if you could give us a feeler of the extracurricular related questions that were thrown at you.
Extracurriculars. I think one of the questions was around the challenges I faced during, whatever extracurriculars. I did a lot of theater, so maybe, and I think I don't exactly remember, but it was around the challenges and my learnings. Yeah, my learnings, exactly. Learnings was what they asked. So what were your key learnings? And I sort of just added on how I've utilized that learning throughout, after the experience. So that was the question around extracurriculars.
Okay, thank you.
All right, perfect. Any other questions regarding the interviews? Anyone else? All right, sounds pretty good. I think we have had a very interesting session, very interesting questions as well. So thank you so much again, Sanchit, for making time for this. And also for everyone who attended, thank you so much for coming up. And I wish you the best for your applications. If you have applied in round 2 and you're waiting for your interview results, I really wish you get through and you get into, you get your interview invite and then you get into ISB. If you require help with your mock prep, with your interview prep, feel free to reach out to us. If you feel like you require a professional touch, we can definitely help you out. I think we have one more question from Nimit, so let's take that and then we close the session. Hi, Nimit.
Hi Piyush, thank you so much. So my question is not exactly related to the interview experience. So my question is that I've had around 3 years of WorkX, and in these 3 years I've changed 3 companies because I was not happy with the work I was doing in. So with the first one and then the second one. So how can that impact my application and my interview?
Interesting question. It does not have any impact. I'll go philosophical there. See, what you have to keep in mind when you're preparing your applications for any B schools, like international B schools or ISB, right? What matters a lot is the way you present yourself, the story that you create for yourself, right? Because issues can be found everywhere. What you are looking at as an issue is 3 saal mein 3 companies change kar diya, so that's an issue. You could also say the same thing for Sanchit. 3 saal mein ek bhi company change nahi kiya, right? Or maybe I think 4 years now. So issues, you can create issues at any place, right? What matters is the story that is behind it, right? So if you're able to justify why you wanted to change, or why did you change so frequently? What were you expecting to learn? What did you learn through those changes? Nobody's going to care that you have changed 3 companies across 3 years, right? As long as your story is solid. If your story is not very convincing, if it feels like through your story that you are only trying to jump places and trying to escape previous places, then that story obviously will not work very well, right? But if you're able to build a very strong story, which really brings out your motivation for why did you change, what did you expect to learn in the next phase, that presents a much more positive sort of perspective to the B schools of what has been the thought process behind your decisions. As long as that is clear, B schools don't really care. They want good people. They're getting a good person. That's it. That's what they want. So I hope that clarifies, Nimit. And again, thank you so much, Sanchit, for making time. I'm not going to keep you much longer. I'm pretty sure you're very hungry as well. Thank you so much for being in right after your work and on a Monday morning, so on a Monday evening. So thank you, everyone. It's been great having you. We will also be uploading this sort of recording over to on our YouTube channel. So if you have missed out anything, or if you would want to recap something, you can, I think you can always check out our YouTube channel and you'll find it there. But thanks again, everyone. Have a very nice evening. Thanks again, Sanchit, for joining us and sharing your experiences. It's incredible catching up with you, sort of hearing your thoughts.
Thanks a lot. All the best, everyone.